Hello, hello, hello. Today we're looking at firms and production for GCSE Economics. Let's get into it. So here's a syllabus list of what we're going to go through. Firms, cost, revenues, cost of production, and revenue calculations. Okay, let's get started. Fixed and variable costs. When you go home, what kind of expenses do your mum and dad have in the house? You probably don't even know about it, do you? You probably live a happy, comfortable, lovely life without worrying about your parents' burdens of debt, or looming rent, or electricity, or all those things that come into daily life. So there's lots of things. What if you go to a private school? You've got your education fee. There's rent, car payments, gas, electricity, water, internet, food, clothes, cleaning products, electronics. It doesn't stop. So there's lots of costs in your household, and we need to know how to divide them into fixed costs and variable costs. So for fixed costs then, what are they? They're costs that your parents or a company might have that do not change, okay, over time. They're usually fixed. So let's put it in the context of a company, all right? So in the context of a company, the rental cost of buildings. Usually you sign a contract for 1 or 2 years, and then you pay a fixed amount every month for these buildings. Similar concept with the cost of leasing. What about employing staff? If you have salaried staff, they earn the same every month regardless of their output. And when you take out a loan, the payback amount might be the same every year, depending on how the loan was decided. So these are all fixed costs. It doesn't matter if you produce 1 item or 1,000,000 items, these costs don't change in your business. So that's why there's an incentive to produce more items in your business. So fixed costs are related to the short run, and a lot of students ask me, what is the short run? Like I said, it's just like a contract, a couple of years. A company might have got an employee to sign a work contract, and they pay them X amount every year, and it doesn't change. That is until the employee decides on a new contract. Now, average fixed costs are quite simple. It's the total fixed costs divided by the number of items you make. So, if I rent a factory for $1,000 a month, I produce 500 eggs, my average fixed cost in my factory is going to be $2. I hope that makes sense. So, basically, if we put average fixed costs on a graph, we can see that over time, average fixed costs decline. So we have an incentive to produce more and more goods in order to reduce our average fixed cost. So if I rent a factory and I produce 20 toy cars, my average fixed cost is going to be $50 per car. Or if I produce more, I produce 40 cars, the average fixed cost is going to be $25 per car. And we can see 20 cars might be here on the graph and 40 cars might be here on the graph. Now, variable costs. So variable costs vary directly with output. So basically it's the cost per unit. Think about these shoes that we see in the picture here and think about the raw materials. So basically this shoe leather, the actual leather that they're put into, the heel, all these things are bought separately, and each one represents part of a variable cost for each shoe you produce. So if I make shoes and I need $6 of leather for each shoe, the variable cost of making 2 shoes or a pair is going to be $12. And if I make 100 pairs of shoes, I'm paying $1,200 just to make my lovely shoes. Hope it's worth it. This would also mean a pair, when they come together as a 2, is $24. So I want you to look at these 10 here, these 10 costs, and I want you to work out which is fixed and which is variable. Can you pause the video and do that now? All right, let's have a look then. Rent for office space. That's going to be fixed, right? Because you pay the same amount every month for your office space. You've got a contract for it. What about the electricity bill? That's a difficult one. Sometimes it's fixed, depending on where you're staying, and sometimes it's not. More often than not, it's not, and it's variable. It depends on how much you use the electricity on a daily basis. So mostly variable, we'll say for that one. Employee wages. Wages are variable because they're different to salary. Salary is fixed, wages are variable. If this person works 40 hours or 50 hours, they'll get paid based on how many hours they work. Raw material for production. It's variable, isn't it? As we just saw with that leather. It depends on how many shoes we need to produce. If we produce 1,000 shoes, we're going to need more than we would need for 100 shoes. Advertising expenses. Advertising expenses will vary firm to firm and vary depending on your budget, so absolutely variable. Here's a quick list of the 5. Now, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Insurance premiums. Most of you probably don't know what that is, but you get insurance on lots of things. Basically, you sign a contract for a year and you're insured. Usually it's for like cars or factories that contain expensive items. Property taxes. Well, if you own the same property, well, usually this is fixed depending on the area, right? But sometimes if the value of your property goes up, Naturally, the property tax value goes up as well in certain countries. That can be really frustrating for people. Just all these extra bills flying out of nowhere because the house went up in value. I guess it's not a bad place to be in, though, in the long run. Maintenance costs, absolutely variable. You don't know what's going to break down on what day and how much it's going to cost. Internet and phone bills, mostly fixed. Mostly fixed. You just need that unlimited data package and then you're off, aren't you? And salary of the CEO, fixed because it's a salary. And here's the data for all this. All right, I hope we're getting more comfortable with fixed and variable costs. Let's move forward. Here's a little table on the right. Oh, so we're just going to have a quick look at revenue and the concept of it. And revenue is price times quantity. We can see here that this business has 4 different products. For example, they've made 5,000 blue items and they sell them for £10 each. Their revenue for that item is 50,000. For the red item, they've made 2,500 and the price is 12. So they've made 30,000 for that item. What we do is we add all these together and we work out how much money that company's made. That is revenue. Of course, we haven't taken away our expenses, we haven't paid our salaries, and we haven't paid tax yet. But that's quite a nice sum, isn't it? Now, we could put this on a graph, okay? And revenue is price times quantity. We know in the demand and supply graph we have price here, quantity here. We know at this point that demand for a good or service is really low because the price is high. But we also know that as prices go down, people are more willing and able to buy these goods and services. This is called the income effect because you're comparatively richer, and the substitution effect because you choose this item instead of other ones. That's why the line slopes this way. So, if we know revenue is price times quantity, can you calculate the revenue at point A for me and point B for me? You can pause this video. Did you get it? So A is going to be 16 times 25. It's going to be this box here. And B is 32 times 13, which is going to be this box here. So we can see if we move from A to B, we'd actually get a higher revenue. That's pretty good, isn't it? But that doesn't mean we're going to have a higher profit. There's loads of other things we need to work out. Right, moving forward. Can you calculate this table for me? We're going to have total costs and we're going to have average costs in this column. So if you remember what I said before, you can see the equation there for average cost. Can you give it a go? All right, let's have a look. So what we can see here then is even with zero output, we've got our total fixed cost. Maybe this is the cost of our factory, okay? We haven't produced anything, but we still have to pay that $200 a month. We've got no choice. Doesn't matter if we produce goods or not. We owe this much every month for our factory. Moving on though, let's say we up our production to 50 a month. Still got to pay our 200, but also look at this. Variable cost is $2 per item. So our total cost for this company are 300. Okay? So we paid 300 for making our items and for the factory rent, and we made 50. So the average cost is now 6. 300 divided by 50. But look at this. Look what happens when we ramp up production. Now we've got 100. Variable costs have increased, of course. Total costs have increased by 80. But the average cost of production's gone down. This is wonderful. And look, as we produce more, average costs keep going down and down and down and down until, look what happens here. Average costs go back up again. Usually this is because the firm gets too big and there's not enough resources for staff members to use. Think about a coffee shop that had 3 coffee machines and 3 staff, and they were producing at around this point. But then when you employ the 4th member of staff, it's becoming more expensive. The output is increasing a little bit, but on average, it's starting to lose you money because you've got 3 coffee machines and 4 people. They're getting in each other's way. They might be less efficient. And if we keep doing that in a small space, the prices are going to creep up again and again and again. So we call this economies of scale, if you remember, where your average cost of production go down. And then later on, we call this diseconomies of scale as your average production costs go up. So this is what it looks like on a graph, your 3 costs. We got our fixed costs of 200 here, if you remember. They don't change. Total costs, however, is simply your variable cost, this red line, plus this blue line of fixed costs. And that's why the gap stays the same all the way. We can see a really, really good rate of return here until we hit this point where our diseconomies of scale start to set in and the cost of producing extra units goes up considerably. So somewhere in the middle is going to be the sweet spot. All right, moving forward. This is just the consolidation idea of all the equations that we've learned today. Okay, so now we have a real exam question, which is explain the difference between fixed costs and variable costs. I'm going to give you a tip for this. It's a 4-mark question, okay? So I want you to define and give examples of each one. That'll get you 2 marks. And then I want you to write 2 differences you can think of. That'll get you another 2 marks. Now, it is changing. The landscape is changing a little bit with these questions. So it's moving towards the idea with explain that you would choose 2 differences and you would explain them in detail, and that would be enough. But some questions still demand definition, so we've got to be quite careful with these explain questions. It's not a one-size-fits-all policy, sadly. So pause the video and see what you can do. All right, let's see what we got then. So for a mark, fixed costs are, we're explaining what they are. They stay the same regardless of the level of output. Remember what we said before, rent for a factory. That's a really good example. You got a contract for 2 years and you can't change it in the short run. Variable costs are different though, aren't they? Every time you produce a new pair of shoes, you have to pay a certain amount of money for leather. So variable costs. Variable costs are dependent on how much is produced. So let's look at 2 differences. The first one, fixed costs are going to stay constant. Doesn't matter how much output there is, they're going to stay the same. But variable costs increase as output increases. You've got to keep buying more leather for shoes. Another difference, average fixed cost decreases, output increases. Because the more you produce, you divide that output by the total fixed costs, as we saw in that graph before. Let me quickly just go back to that. Here it is. As we produce more, average fixed costs go down. And with variable costs in this direct comparison, they vary, don't they, as output increases, and we can show that based on the table. You see how total variable costs? They're not like a straight line. It has different proportions as the output increases. So yep, there's your comprehensive answer. All right, that's it from me today. Have a great day, and I'll see you again.